Jessica Matthews, 32, never expected her family's Sunday dinner to end with her mother in tears and her father storming out. After years of being the family disappointment, Jessica finally revealed the truth that would shatter her parents' carefully constructed facade and expose the web of lies that had defined their relationship for the past decade. Before I continue with my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and if you enjoy family revenge dramas where karma finally catches up, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how my mother's face changed when she realized who had been keeping her comfortable lifestyle afloat all these years. The Matthews family had always maintained appearances. From the outside, they were the picture of upper-middle-class American success, a beautiful colonial home in Connecticut, European vacations documented meticulously on social media, and two daughters who seemingly represented different sides of achievement. There was my sister Amber, 35, the golden child with her law degree from Harvard, perfect husband who worked in finance, and two photogenic children who excelled at everything they touched. And then there was me, Jessica, the supposed underachiever, who had wasted her potential on a career in digital marketing that my parents never bothered to understand. Your sister made partner last year, my mother Caroline would remind me during our weekly phone calls. What's new with your little internet job? The dismissal in her voice had become so familiar that I barely registered it anymore. It didn't matter that I had built a 7-figure digital marketing agency from scratch in my mother's eyes. It wasn't prestigious enough to brag about at her country club luncheons. The dynamic had been established early in our childhood. Amber followed the traditional path that pleased our parents' straight A's extracurriculars, that looked good on college applications, and a career trajectory that our father Richard, a corporate attorney himself, could boast about. I was creative, questioned authority, and refused to be pushed into law school despite my equally impressive grades. This deviation from my father's plan for me was treated as a personal betrayal. "We didn't pay for your education, so you could play around on Facebook all day," my father had said when I launched my agency 5 years ago. The irony was that my playing around on Facebook had quickly become far more profitable than he could have imagined. But I kept the details of my success private, partly because they never asked, and partly because I had grown tired of fighting for their approval. What my family didn't know was that 3 years ago, when my father's law firm faced a massive lawsuit over partner misconduct, their financial situation had collapsed almost overnight. The beautiful house, the luxury cars, the country club membership, all of it was suddenly at risk. My mother had called me in tears one night, not because she wanted to share their troubles with me, but because they needed to borrow money to keep Amber's children in private school until things stabilized. "Just until your father's new position comes through," she had promised. "We can't let the kids suffer. You know how important consistency is for them." I had agreed, immediately transferring enough money to cover 6 months of expenses for the children's education. What started as a temporary loan quickly expanded. Their new normal included me quietly covering their mortgage for a month, then their car payments, then the country club dues that my mother couldn't bear to give up because it would raise too many questions. All while they continued to introduce me at family functions as Jessica, our daughter who works with computers, with the same dismissive tone they'd always used. My sister Amber knew nothing about this arrangement. She was kept in the dark about our parents' financial troubles because, as my mother explained, she has enough pressure at work. We don't want to burden her. The golden child had to be protected at all costs, while I was deemed strong enough to shoulder their secrets and their bills. I didn't mind helping my family. I had the means, and I loved them, despite everything. What I couldn't stomach was the continued facade that I was somehow less successful, less worthy of respect than my sister. Every family gathering became an exercise in restraint as I listened to stories about Amber's accomplishments, while my own achievements were ignored or diminished. The situation reached a breaking point 3 weeks ago when my father called with news that he'd finally secured a position at a prestigious firm in Boston. "We're back on our feet now," he announced proudly. "We won't need your help anymore." I had expected some acknowledgement of the nearly $300,000 I had provided over the past 3 years. Perhaps not public recognition, I understood their pride, but at least private gratitude. Instead, the conversation quickly pivoted to Amber's upcoming vacation to the Maldives and how impressed everyone at the country club had been when she mentioned it. "Maybe someday you'll be able to travel like that, Jessica," my mother had added. "If you'd consider going back for an MBA, like we suggested, you could find a more stable position." That was when I decided the charade had gone on long enough. I agreed to host the next Sunday family dinner at my apartment in New York. My parents rarely visited my home, preferring that I come to them in Connecticut, but I insisted it was my turn. I spent the week preparing not just the meal, but also the documentation that would finally set the record straight. As I chopped vegetables and marinated steaks for the dinner, I rehearsed what I would say. Part of me hoped that simply showing them my apartment, the 3,000 square foot Soho loft, with views of the city that I had purchased outright last year, would be enough to make them reassess their perceptions. But I knew my mother would likely attribute it to getting lucky or overpaying rather than acknowledging my success. What they didn't know was that the company I had built now employed 35 people, managed marketing for Fortune 500 clients, and had been featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30 list the previous year. I had never shared the article with them, tired of seeing excitement turn to confusion when they realized my accomplishments didn't fit their narrow definition of success. Amber had confirmed she would attend with her husband and children, completing the family picture. I was nervous about including her in this revelation, but she deserved to know the truth as much as anyone. For years, our relationship had been strained by our parents' obvious favoritism, and while I didn't blame her for it, we had never been as close as sisters should be. As Sunday approached, I finalized my preparations. The meal would be perfect. I had hired a private chef to ensure it, wanting no distractions from the conversation that needed to happen. The documentation was organized in a leather portfolio on my desk, bank statements, showing transfers to my parents' accounts, emails from my mother detailing new expenses they needed covered, and the original loan agreement my father had. He insisted on creating, though he had never made a single payment toward it. The truth was about to come to light, and I was finally ready to demand the respect I had earned, not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as the daughter who had silently kept their world from crumbling while they continued to belittle her. Achievements. What made the situation even more complex was that Amber's perfect life was built on carefully constructed illusions of her own. My sister, for all her outward success, was drowning in debt and marital problems that she hid from our parents with the same determination they used to hide their financial troubles. 2 years ago, Amber had called me in a panic. Her voice was tight with stress as she confessed that her husband James had a gambling problem that had spiraled out of control. He took out a second mortgage without telling me, she had whispered, afraid that someone might overhear, despite being alone in her office. "We're behind on the kids' school tuition, and Mom and Dad can't find out." I had helped her then, too, creating a shell company through which I channeled funds to her disguised as legal consulting fees, so her husband wouldn't question the source. It was easier for Amber to accept my help because she could pretend it was earned income rather than charity from her less successful sister. During our infrequent sister lunches, Amber would drop hints about the strain in her marriage: James staying out late, unexplained charges on credit cards, arguments behind closed doors, but she maintained the charade of perfection around our parents. She had been groomed since childhood to be the family success story, and admitting failure wasn't an option for her. "I don't know how you do it," she had confided during one of these lunches, picking at her salad. "You just live your life without caring what they think." I care. I had corrected her. I've just stopped expecting them to notice. The irony wasn't lost on me that both Amber and I were playing roles in the family drama, neither of us fully authentic in our parents' presence. The difference was that I had built a life that brought me genuine satisfaction, while Amber was trapped in a performance that was slowly crushing her. The weekend before the fateful dinner, Amber had visited my apartment alone, something she rarely did to drop off a belated birthday gift. She had wandered through my space, taking in the modern art on the walls, the state-of-the-art kitchen, the terrace with its herb garden and view of the city. "This is amazing, Jess," she had said, genuine admiration in her voice. "I had no idea you were doing this well." "You never asked," I replied, not unkindly. She had looked embarrassed, then recognizing the truth in my words. Mom and Dad always made it sound like I was barely scraping by. Yeah, that's the narrative they prefer. We had sat on my terrace drinking wine as the sun set over the city, and for the first time in years, we had talked honestly. Amber confessed that James had relapsed again, losing a significant amount of money on sports betting. Her perfect children were struggling, her son with anxiety, her daughter with eating issues that had begun when she overheard her parents fighting about money. "Everyone thinks I have it all together," she had said, tears forming, "but I'm barely holding on some days. Why don't you tell Mom and Dad the truth?" I had asked. "They might surprise you." Amber had laughed bitterly. "You know why? They need me to be perfect. If they knew about James, about the money problems, about the kids, it would destroy them." What she didn't say, but we both understood, was that it would destroy their image of her. The golden child couldn't fail. It would upend the family mythology they had crafted so carefully. As she was leaving that night, Amber had hugged me tightly. "Maybe it's time for things to change," she had said cryptically. I didn't know then that she was planning her own revelation for the family dinner. The morning of the dinner, Amber called to confirm she was coming, but mentioned that James wouldn't be joining us. "He's out of town," she said in a tone that suggested this wasn't the full truth. Her children would stay with James's parents for the day. When I asked if everything was okay, she hesitated before answering. "Let's just say I'm ready for the masks to come off." I spent the hours before their arrival in a state of nervous anticipation. The chef prepared and left, leaving behind a meal that only needed final touches. I changed outfits 3 times, unsure whether I wanted to look successful enough to impress them or casual enough to suggest I didn't care about their opinion. I settled on a simple black dress that I had worn to accept an industry award last year, a small private rebellion. At precisely 5 p.m., the doorman called to announce my parents' arrival. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and prepared to welcome them into my world, a world they had never bothered to truly see. As I opened the door, my mother's eyes widened slightly at the sight of my apartment, but she quickly recovered, kissing my cheek and handing me a bottle of wine that cost a fraction of what I typically purchased. "This is interesting," she said, glancing around with a faint air of disapproval. "Very modern. I suppose that appeals to young people." My father followed behind her, his handshake formal as always. "Nice place," he said gruffly, which from him was practically effusive praise. They settled on my living room sofa, looking uncomfortable and out of place among my carefully chosen furnishings. My mother immediately began a story about running into the daughter of one of their friends who had just made junior partner at a prestigious law firm. Just like Amber following in her father's footsteps, she concluded with a pointed look at me. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang again. Amber had arrived looking uncharacteristically subdued in jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail instead of her usual perfect blowout. She hugged me tightly at the door, whispering, "I've got your back today," and I knew that something significant was about to unfold. The stage was set, the players assembled. Years of unspoken truths and carefully maintained facades were about to collapse, starting with the simple question my mother would ask halfway through the appetizer. "So, Jessica, are you still doing that social media thing? Any prospects for a real career on the horizon?" The dinner began like many others in our family, with superficial conversation and undercurrents of judgment. My mother complimented the apartment, but managed to make it sound like faint praise. "It's very creative. I suppose that's what appeals to your generation." I served drinks in the living room first, an aged scotch for my father that I noted cost more than the bottle he typically bragged about, and wine for my mother and Amber. The kitchen and dining area opened onto the living space, giving me a clear view of their reactions as I put the finishing touches on our first course. "Where's James today?" my father asked Amber, loosening his tie slightly as he settled into my Italian leather armchair. "We're separating," Amber said, simply dropping the bomb with such casualness that at first I thought I had misheard. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. "You're what's separating. Possibly divorcing. He's moved out and we're figuring out the details." Amber continued, her voice steady, though I could see the slight tremor in her hands. My mother glanced around as though someone might be recording this conversation. "But the club fundraiser is next month. You're on the committee together." It was such a quintessentially Caroline Matthews response, concerned about appearances rather than her daughter's well-being, that I nearly laughed out loud. "I'm sure the committee will survive," Amber replied dryly. "The marriage, however, won't." My father cleared his throat. "Is this about his problem? I thought that was handled." Amber's eyes widened slightly. "You knew about the gambling. Your mother mentioned concerns a while back," he admitted, looking uncomfortable. "We assumed you had it under control." I carried in the appetizers seared scallops with a citrus reduction and placed them on the coffee table. "Dinner's almost ready, but I thought we could start with these." "This looks expensive," my mother commented, poking at the scallop with her fork. "You didn't need to go overboard, Jessica. A simple pasta would have been fine." I bit my tongue, reminding myself to stick to the plan. The revelations needed to unfold in the right order. So my father turned to Amber, clearly wanting to move past the uncomfortable topic. "What arrangements are you making for the children? You'll need a good lawyer for the custody agreement." "Actually," Amber said, taking a large sip of wine, "I already have a lawyer." Jessica recommended her. Both my parents turned to look at me with surprise. "You have a divorce attorney?" my mother asked incredulously. "I have contacts in many fields," I replied evenly. "My business requires a diverse network." My father waved his hand dismissively. "Amber needs someone with expertise in family law, not some entertainment lawyer who handles your internet contracts." There it was again, the casual dismissal of my professional life. I caught Amber's eye and she gave me a small nod of solidarity. "Catherine Brewer is handling my case," Amber said. "She's one of the top family law attorneys in New York, and Jessica introduced us at a charity gala last year." My mother blinked rapidly, processing this information. "You attend charity galas? I sponsor them occasionally," I said, rising to check on the main course. "Dinner's ready. Shall we move to the table?" The dining table, a custom piece of walnut and brushed steel that had been featured in an architectural magazine, commanded attention in the center of the space. I had set it with understated elegance, fine china crystal glasses, and a low arrangement of fresh flowers that wouldn't impede conversation. As we took our seats, my mother couldn't help but comment, "These dishes look like the ones in that home magazine I read. Quite expensive, if I recall." They are, I confirmed, serving the perfectly cooked steaks and truffle-infused sides. "The designer is a client." "A client," my father repeated, as though the word was unfamiliar. "Yes, Dad. Someone who pays my company for services. Like most of the Fortune 500 companies we represent." His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Fortune 500. Before I could elaborate, my mother steered the conversation back to what she considered more important matters. Amber, have you thought about how this will affect the children's school situation? And the club membership. Amber put down her fork. Mom, I just told you my marriage is ending and you're worried about the country club. I'm being practical. My mother defended herself. These things matter for the children's future. They need stability connections. What they need is a mother who isn't miserable and a father who isn't gambling away their college fund, Amber replied sharply. My father's face darkened. The situation can't be that dire. James makes a good living, Maid Amber corrected. He was asked to leave the firm 3 months ago. Another partner covered it up as a sabbatical because they didn't want the scandal. He's been pretending to go to work while actually spending his days at underground poker games. My mother looked physically ill. But the Maldives trip canceled. That was just for show. We haven't been able to afford a vacation in over a year. The facade was crumbling quickly now. My mother turned to me, perhaps seeking safer conversation. Well, at least Jessica's little business seems to be doing well enough for some nice dinnerware. And there it was, the perfect opening. My little business grossed $23 million last year, Mom. The silence that followed was profound. My father's knife scraped loudly against the plate. That's not possible, he finally said. You work in social media. I own a digital marketing agency with 35 employees. We handle online strategy for some of the largest corporations in America. I took a sip of wine, letting that sink in. And I've been paying your mortgage for the past 3 years. My mother's face drained of color. That's not Richard. Tell her that's not true. My father's expression had turned to stone, his jaw clenched tight. That was a temporary arrangement. 3 years is hardly temporary, I countered. Neither is $300,000. Amber gasped softly. She knew I had helped our parents, but not the extent of it. We were going to pay you back, my mother said weakly. When I asked, before or after you finish telling everyone how disappointed you are in my career choices? That's unfair, Jessica, my father started, but Amber interrupted. Is it? You've been letting Jess support you while continuing to treat her like she's some kind of failure. She's been helping me too. Did you know that, paying for the kids' therapy after they started having anxiety from all the fighting at home? My mother looked between us, her world visibly realigning. I don't understand. If you've been so successful, why didn't you say anything? I tried, I said simply. You weren't interested. You had already decided which daughter was successful and which one was a disappointment. The actual facts didn't matter. The main course sat largely untouched as the carefully constructed family mythology continued to unravel thread by thread. My father, always the attorney, attempted to regain control of the narrative. Now, let's not be dramatic, he said, his voice taking on the same tone he used in courtroom negotiations. We've always supported both our daughters equally. Amber actually laughed at this, a short, bitter sound that startled even her. Dad, that's simply not true. I was the good investment, and Jessica was the creative phase you hoped would pass. That's ridiculous, my mother interjected, though her voice lacked conviction. We've always been proud of both of you. I rose and walked to the sideboard where I had placed the leather portfolio earlier. Let's look at some evidence, shall we, since we're all about facts in this family? I returned to the table and removed several documents, sliding them across to my parents. These are bank statements showing transfers from my accounts to yours over the past 3 years. And these, I produced another set of papers, are emails from Mom detailing new expenses that needed to be covered. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she looked at the evidence of her own requests. Jessica, the country club, has raised their annual dues. Your father doesn't want to lose our standing there, but with everything else. And this one, I continued, pointing to another email. The roof needs repairs before winter. $22,000. I know it's a lot to ask, but we'll pay you back when things turn around. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is inappropriate. Family matters should remain private. They have been private, I countered. So private that you've been able to maintain the fiction that I'm struggling while you're thriving. So private that Amber didn't know the extent of your financial problems, and you didn't know about hers. Amber reached across the table and took one of the bank statements, studying the figures with widened eyes. Jess, I had no idea it was this much. Your sister has been very generous, my father acknowledged stiffly, and we're grateful. But that doesn't change the fact that Amber followed the path we laid out for success, while Jessica chose a less conventional route. And which of us is actually successful now, Dad? I asked quietly. By any objective measure, financial security, career satisfaction, personal happiness, how would you score your daughters today? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and demanding. My father busied himself with cutting his steak into increasingly smaller pieces. My mother looked close to tears. I need some air, Amber suddenly announced, pushing back from the table. She walked to the terrace doors and stepped outside, her silhouette visible against the city lights beyond. My mother watched her go with concern. Should I give her a minute? I suggested. This isn't easy for any of us. In the momentary quiet, I decided to push forward. The reason I'm bringing all this up isn't to embarrass you or make you feel badly. It's because I'm done being the family disappointment when I've actually been the family safety net. We never called you a disappointment, my mother protested weakly. Not in those exact words, perhaps, I acknowledged. But every comparison to Amber, every dismissal of my career as that internet thing, every suggestion that I get a real job, it all communicated the same message. My father finally looked up from his plate. Your mother and I came from a different generation. We understand traditional career paths, law, medicine, finance. What you do was harder for us to grasp. You never tried to grasp it, I pointed out. You never once asked me to explain my business model, or visited my office, or showed any interest in understanding how I built something successful from nothing. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. We didn't want to interfere. There's a wide gap between interfering and showing basic interest, Mom. Amber returned from the terrace, her expression composed but determined. She sat down and looked directly at our parents. Jessica's right. You created this dynamic where I was the successful one and she was the creative one who needed to find her way. But the truth is, she found her way years ago and neither of you bothered to notice. My father shifted uncomfortably. Amber, your situation with James is unfortunate but temporary. You still have your career, your education. I'm quitting the firm, Amber interrupted. My mother gasped. You can't. I already have. I gave notice last week. I'm miserable. There have been for years. The hours are killing me. I barely see my children, and I'm defending corporations that I actually find morally reprehensible. But you're a partner, my father sputtered. Yes, a partner in a toxic environment that rewards hours billed over actual justice. I went into law because you convinced me it was the only respectable path, Dad. Not because I loved it. My father looked genuinely bewildered. What will you do instead? Amber glanced at me, a small smile forming. Actually, Jessica and I have been talking. She needs someone with legal expertise to head up a new division at her company. Corporate compliance for digital marketing is a growing field, and it would combine my legal background with something more meaningful. If my revelation had been a bombshell, Amber's was a nuclear explosion in my parents' worldview. The golden daughter was not only divorcing and leaving her prestigious position, but going to work for the disappointment. You'd be working. For your sister, my mother asked, as though trying to process a foreign concept. With my sister, Amber corrected. As a department head. with better hours, more flexibility for the kids, and a salary that actually exceeds what I'm making now once you factor in Jessica's profit-sharing structure. My father pushed his plate away, his appetite apparently gone. I don't understand what's happening here. When did our family become this? It's been this way for a long time, I said gently. We've just been pretending otherwise. I turned to look at everyone at the table, my sister finding her courage, my mother looking lost, my father struggling with his tightly held beliefs about success and family hierarchy. Something in me softened. Despite everything, these were people I loved. Look, I said I didn't invite you here to punish you or to gloat. I invited you because it's time for honesty. I'm proud of what I've built. I want you to be proud of me too, not because I've helped you financially, but because I've created something meaningful on my own terms. My mother reached across the table, tentatively touching my hand. I am proud of you, Jessica. I just didn't understand. Because you never tried to, Amber pointed out not unkindly. Perhaps that's true, my mother admitted, surprising me with her candor. We got comfortable with certain ideas about both of you, and it was easier not to question them. I wonder if any of you watching have experienced something similar with your family, those moments when the truth finally breaks through years of misconceptions. If you're enjoying this story of family revelations, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more real-life family dramas unfold. I'd love to hear your thoughts on family dynamics in the comments section below. Now let's get back to how this intense dinner conversation continued. My father had remained silent, and I could see him processing everything: the financial revelations, Amber's career change, the shifting of power within the family hierarchy. For a man who had always been in control, this was perhaps the most difficult adjustment. I think he finally said, clearing his throat, that your mother and I need to reevaluate some things. It wasn't an apology, but from my father, it was significant, an acknowledgement that the family narrative needed to change. I suggest we finish this excellent meal that Jessica has provided. He continued, making a visible effort to engage differently, and perhaps she can tell us more about this business of hers that we've clearly underestimated. It was a small olive branch, but I was willing to accept it. As I began to describe my company's growth and vision, I noticed something I had rarely seen before my parents were actually listening. As dessert was served, a delicate panna cotta that even my mother had to admit was exquisite, the conversation shifted from the immediate revelations to the deeper patterns that had shaped our family for decades. I think we need to understand how we got here, Amber suggested, sipping her coffee. This didn't happen overnight. My father shifted uncomfortably. The past is the past. What matters is moving forward. But we'll just repeat the same patterns if we don't understand them, I pointed out. There's a reason you put so much pressure on Amber to follow your path, and there's a reason you gave up on me so easily. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she set down her dessert spoon. Your father had such dreams for both of you. They weren't dreams, they were expectations, Amber corrected, and they were different for each of us. Jessica got written off as artistic and free-spirited by the time she was 12. My father frowned. That's not fair. You showed an aptitude for debate and structure. Jessica was always more creative. I was on the debate team too, Dad, I reminded him. I captained it my senior year. You were. He looked genuinely surprised. You and Mom were at Amber's mock trial competition that weekend. Grandma came to see me win the state championship. A heavy silence fell over the table as this simple example illustrated exactly the dynamic we were discussing. My father had the grace to look embarrassed. The thing is, I continued, this goes back even further than our childhood. It's about you, Dad. His head snapped up. Me? What are you talking about? Your father, my mother said quietly, surprising us all. She rarely spoke about my paternal grandfather, who had died before Amber and I were born. Jessica reminds him of your father. My father's expression darkened. That's ridiculous. Is it? My mother looked at him steadily. Your father was creative entrepreneurial. He started businesses, took risks. Some failed, some succeeded. He wasn't predictable or conventional, just like Jessica. I stared at my mother, astonished that she had made this connection, and more astonished that she was voicing it. My father was irresponsible, my father said tightly. He left us financially vulnerable multiple times with his ventures, and he also created a manufacturing company that put you through college and law school, my mother countered. But you only remember the failures, not the successes. Just like with Jessica, you focus on the uncertainty of her path, not the achievements. Amber leaned forward, intrigued. Is that why you pushed me toward law so hard? Because it was safe. Predictable. My father was silent for a long moment, then sighed deeply. Perhaps he admitted. I watched my mother worry about money, about stability, when my father's businesses struggled. I never wanted that for my family. So you pushed Amber toward the most stable path you could envision. I said the pieces falling into place, and you gave up on me because I reminded you of the unpredictability you feared. I didn't give up on you, he protested. You stopped trying to understand me, I corrected him. It was easier to dismiss what I was building than to engage with it and risk being impressed by something that didn't fit your definition of success. My mother reached over and placed her hand on my father's. Richard, she's right. We've been unfair to Jessica because of our fears. And we've been unfair to Amber by pushing her into a life that doesn't make her happy. I just wanted what was best for you both, my father said, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. No, Amber said gently. You wanted what felt safest to you. There's a difference. I thought about the years of seeking approval, of swallowing hurt when my accomplishments were dismissed, of finally giving up on ever being seen clearly by my parents. The irony is that I've actually created exactly the kind of security and stability you always wanted for us, Dad. Just not in the way you expected. My father nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Your grandfather would be proud, he said finally. He always said conventional paths were for conventional thinkers. It was perhaps the most meaningful compliment he had ever given me. I felt a tightness in my chest, release a tension I'd carried for so long I'd stopped noticing it. There's something else you should know, my mother said, looking nervous. Something that contributed to our financial problems. My father shot her a warning look, but she continued anyway. Richard's firm didn't just face a lawsuit. He left because he refused to defend a pharmaceutical company that was covering up evidence about side effects from one of their medications. I looked at my father with new eyes. You quit on principle, he shrugged uncomfortably. The case was morally indefensible. I couldn't be part of it. So you walked away from a senior partnership, Amber said, sounding impressed. That's actually really admirable, Dad. It was also financially catastrophic, he admitted. We should have downsized, immediately been honest with everyone about our situation. Instead, we tried to maintain appearances, and that's when the real problem started. Why didn't you tell us? I asked. My mother looked down at her hands. Pride, I suppose. And we didn't want to burden you. Yet you were fine burdening Jessica financially, Amber pointed out. My father had the grace to look ashamed. We told ourselves it was temporary, that we'd pay it all back once I got established at a new firm. But then it became easy. Too easy. And you never acknowledged what it meant, I said quietly. That I was successful enough to support all of us. We should have my mother admitted. We were wrong, Jessica. Deeply wrong. It was the first real apology, and though simple, it felt monumental. Years of dismissal and judgment acknowledged in those few words. As we sat there, our family's true dynamics finally exposed to the light, I realized we had reached a turning point. The old hierarchy had collapsed, but something potentially stronger could be built in its place if we were brave enough to try. The following weeks brought changes that would have been unimaginable before our revelatory dinner. My father, stripped of his illusions about both his daughters, began the humbling process of actually getting to know us as adults. He visited my office for the first time, spending a day observing meetings, talking to my team, and witnessing firsthand the empire I had built. I watched his expression transform from polite interest to genuine amazement as he sat in on a pitch meeting for a global technology client. That was impressive, he admitted, as we rode the elevator down at day's end. The way you handled their concerns, anticipated their questions. You're a natural leader, Jessica. I learned from watching you, I told him honestly. All those dinners where you discussed negotiation tactics, I was listening even if you didn't notice. Something softened in his eyes. I notice now. Meanwhile, Amber moved forward with both her divorce and career transition. James, confronted with evidence of his gambling that would affect custody arrangements, agreed to a fair settlement and committed to treatment. The children began therapy to process the changes, showing resilience that impressed us all. My mother struggled the most with our new family reality. Her identity had been so wrapped up in appearances and the narrative of having one extraordinarily successful daughter that she floundered in social situations. Barbara Whitman asked about Amber leaving the firm. She confessed during our weekly lunch, a new tradition we'd started. I didn't know what to say. How about the truth that Amber is pursuing a more fulfilling path that allows her to use her skills while actually seeing her children occasionally? My mother considered this. It's just not what people expect. Maybe it's time to stop caring so much about others' expectations. I suggested gently. They've cost our family too much already. A surprising ally emerged in helping my mother adjust my sister. Amber, freed from the pressure of being the golden child, discovered reserves of patience neither of us knew she possessed. Mom needs to find her own identity, she explained, when she called to update me on a shopping trip they'd taken. Her whole life has been about Dad's career and our achievements. She doesn't know who she is without that. Do you think she can change? Really change? I asked skeptically. I don't know, Amber admitted. But I think she deserves the chance to try. We both spent years wanting them to see us differently. Now that they're trying, we need to be open to seeing them differently too. She was right, of course. The responsibility for healing didn't rest solely with our parents. Amber and I had our own patterns to break her perfectionism and people-pleasing, my defensive independence and reluctance to be vulnerable. 3 months after the dinner, we gathered again at my apartment. This time, the atmosphere was different, tentative, but hopeful. My father brought wine from a vineyard he'd actually researched because he'd learned I collected certain regions. My mother arrived with a magazine that had featured my company post-it notes, marking sections she wanted to ask about. As we settled in, Amber shared news about her children, her son's anxiety improving, her daughter joining a science club at school. She spoke about her first major project at my company, the challenges and rewards of the transition. I've never seen you so energized about work, our father commented. That's because I was never energized about it before, she replied with a candor that would have been unthinkable in our previous family dynamic. My mother asked thoughtful questions about my upcoming business trip to Singapore, actually listening to my answers, rather than waiting for an opportunity to shift the conversation to something she deemed more impressive. When my father mentioned struggling to rebuild his network at the new firm, I offered introductions to several clients who could use his expertise. He accepted gratefully without the pride that would have previously prevented him from acknowledging my professional connections could benefit him. Later, as Amber and my mother cleared dishes, insisting I relax since I'd cooked, my father sat beside me on the terrace. I've been thinking a lot about my father, he said, watching the city lights, about how I misjudged him. And you. We're not so different, you and I told him. We both want to build something meaningful. We just chose different tools. He nodded thoughtfully. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. We have time, I assured him. Inside, I could hear my mother laughing at something Amber said, a genuine laugh, not the practiced social chuckle she typically employed. Small steps, but meaningful ones. The loan my parents had taken from me was now formalized with a realistic payment plan my father had insisted upon. The weekly payments were less important than the accountability they represented, an acknowledgement of reality rather than comforting fictions. Amber and I had grown closer than we'd been since childhood, the competitive dynamic fostered by our parents finally giving way to mutual support. She brought valuable perspective to my company while I helped her navigate the upheaval in her personal life. "Do you think we'll ever be a normal family?" she asked, as we sat alone later that evening, the last of the wine between us after our parents had departed. "Define normal," I challenged with a smile. "Fair point." She swirled her wine thoughtfully. "Maybe normal is overrated. Maybe functional is what matters." "I'll drink to that," I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. To being functional, even if we're still figuring out what that looks like. The past couldn't be changed, but the future remained unwritten. Our family was learning imperfectly but genuinely to replace old patterns with healthier ones. The masks had come off, and while what lay beneath was still raw and sometimes uncomfortable, it was real, and that was a foundation worth building on. 1 year after the dinner that changed everything, I found myself sitting across from my mother at her favorite cafe in Connecticut. The country club membership had been relinquished months ago, a practical financial decision that had unexpectedly become liberating for her. "I don't miss it," she admitted, surprising both of us. All that energy spent worrying about what people thought. "It's exhausting to remember how much that mattered to me." She looked different these days, less rigid, more present. After decades of being Richard Matthews' wife and Amber and Jessica's mother, she had enrolled in a master gardening program, discovering a passion for landscape design that had lain dormant since college. "I have a client meeting next week," she told me, excitement evident in her voice. "A complete backyard redesign for the Millers. I'm thinking of incorporating a Japanese-inspired meditation garden." "You're building your own business," I observed with a smile. "Entrepreneurship runs in the family after all." She laughed, something she did more freely now. At 63, who would have thought? Our relationship had evolved into something I'd never imagined possible. Not perfect, not without occasional relapses into old patterns, but grounded in a mutual respect that had previously been absent. My father had made his own adjustments, though they came less easily to him. The ethical stand that had cost him his partnership had earned him respect in different circles. He now consulted on corporate governance issues, helping companies navigate the intersection of legal compliance and moral responsibility. "I sleep better," he had confessed during a recent phone call. "The money isn't what it was, but it's enough. More than enough, really." Amber's transformation had been equally profound. Divorced but co-parenting amicably with James, who had maintained his recovery with dedicated effort, she had blossomed in her role at my company. Her children freed from the pressure of being perfect, Matthew's grandchildren were thriving, pursuing their actual interests rather than resume building activities. As for me, acknowledging my success openly had changed how I moved through the world. The chip on my shoulder, the defensive need to prove myself, had gradually fallen away. I expanded the company, thoughtfully turned down a lucrative acquisition offer because it didn't align with my vision, and started a foundation supporting young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. The family dinner tradition continued rotating between our homes, each gathering more genuine than the last. We had learned to disagree without it threatening the entire relationship, to admit mistakes without shame, to celebrate each other's successes without comparison. This particular afternoon with my mother wasn't a special occasion, just coffee between appointments, the kind of casual meeting that would have been unimaginable in our previous dynamic. "I've been thinking," she said, stirring her latte, "about that dinner last year. How differently it could have gone." "How so? If you'd been vindictive? If you'd wanted to punish us for how we treated you?" She met my eyes directly. "You had every right to be angry, Jessica, to cut us off completely. I considered this." The thought had crossed my mind in my darkest moments over the years, but that was never what I truly wanted. "What would that have accomplished?" I asked. "More hurt, different victims. That's not healing, it's just redistributing the pain." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, a gesture that would have felt awkward before, but now came naturally. "When did you get so wise? I've always been wise," I replied with a wink. "You just weren't listening." We both laughed, able now to find humor in painful truths that once would have been too raw to acknowledge. Later that evening, as I prepared for a video call with international clients, I thought about the journey our family had taken. The masks and pretenses had been comfortable in their familiarity, even as they suffocated us. Removing them had been painful, messy, but ultimately the only path to authentic connection. My phone buzzed with a text from Amber. "Dad just sent me an article about your Singapore expansion. He's genuinely proud, keeps forwarding it to his friends." Progress. I smiled at this small but meaningful sign. The father who once couldn't comprehend my career now bragged about it. Not because the external markers of success had changed, those had been present for years, but because he had finally allowed himself to see them. The truth once acknowledged had set all of us free in different ways. My parents from the exhausting maintenance of appearances, Amber from a path that had never truly been hers. Me from the burden of seeking approval that wasn't forthcoming. We were improbably happier now than we had been when everyone was playing their assigned roles perfectly. The authentic connections we'd built, though sometimes messy and challenging, provided a foundation that our carefully maintained facades never could. As I looked out at the New York skyline from my terrace, I thought about the many families maintaining their own illusions, trapped in dynamics that no one was brave enough to challenge. The golden children carrying burdens too heavy to acknowledge, the scapegoats whose gifts went unrecognized, the parents whose fears shaped generations. Perhaps our story wasn't so unusual after all. Perhaps in dining rooms across the country, across the world, similar revelations were waiting to happen, painful but necessary conversations that could transform relationships built on appearances into ones built on truth. What's your story? Have you experienced similar moments of truth and reconciliation in your family? I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. Family dynamics are complex, and sometimes it takes courage to break long-standing patterns, but as my experience shows, the rewards can be life-changing. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more authentic family stories. Your support helps me continue sharing these personal journeys that remind us we're not alone in our family struggles. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that family healing is possible even after years of misunderstanding. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Remember that it's never too late to rebuild relationships on a foundation of truth. Sometimes the most powerful words we can say are simply, "This isn't working, and we deserve better." Until next time, this is Jessica Matthews, reminding you that sometimes the most important family inheritance isn't money or status, it's the courage to see each other clearly.